I talk to people about the fact that I work remotely online with clients who are based in the US and in Europe, I'm kind of given this look of like, well, aren't you a special little unicorn who found like the special like pot of fairy dust tears or something? But the reality is, like, that couldn't be further from the truth. There's nothing special about me. I'm just your regular girl who decided that I want to work online, and I've been figuring it out ever since. And for the last 7 years, I have acquired a number of skills that have really helped me to thrive in the online space. So what I want to do in this video is share some of the skills that I have learned. And in a different video, I want to share you some of the skills that I am learning that are a bit more advanced, especially if you want to work as an executive assistant. So without further ado, let's get into the video where I will share with you some of the skills that I have learned working remotely in the last 7 years. So before we dive in, a bit of backstory. The last time I had a full-time office job was back in 2017 when my son was 3, and that job was exhausting for one reason, really. It was the commute. The commute for me was just insane. I always left the house at like 6:30 in the morning, so he was still asleep by the time I left. And when I got back, he had like 30 minutes to an hour before his bedtime, and I was honestly too exhausted to even engage with him. So I realized that I was actually missing out on enjoying this little bundle of joy that the Lord had given me. And I was just like, yeah, no. So like kind of on a whim, I decided to quit with no plan whatsoever. I don't recommend you do that, by the way. Please always have a backup plan, okay? I was young and stupid. So yeah, I really had no plan for what I was going to do, but I just decided I could not keep commuting. So after I think exactly 4 months, I kind of quit that job. And the only thing I had to go off at the time was I had a friend who was working online on Upwork as, I don't know what she was working as, to be honest. But yeah, she was working online and I could see that she was thriving. Like in a short while, she had moved to a new apartment. She bought a washing machine. She bought a car. I'm like, girl, what you doing? How you making money? So she was like, yeah, I do all this work on Upwork. I'm like, how does it work? Blah, blah, blah. And so I got started. And the first gig that I ever earned, the first gig that I ever worked on, I only earned $25, which after Upwork takes its cut was like $20. So obviously not enough to live off by any stretch of the imagination. But for me, that was all the motivation that I needed, because I was like, listen, someone just paid me $25 for me to do a basic video editing job on the internet. And I was off to the races. I determined right there and then that I was going to figure it out. And now 7 years later, it's been more than 95% of the time I'm working from home online, and I have absolutely no regrets. So that's kind of my backstory. And now I just want to share with you some of the skills that I've learned along the way. Now, like I mentioned before, I started out on Upwork, and the thing with Upwork is you land your gigs by writing proposals. And that brings me to my first skill, which is you need to be able to communicate in a way that is professional. The most important part of the way you communicate online is how you write in your communication. So some of the tips that I have learned along the way is to write the way that I speak, which also means you need to practice speaking proper English, okay? If you can, try and cut out slang in the way that you speak when you're speaking English. Cut out any use of slang, cut out this habit of like, Africans, we have this tendency of like dipping in and out of our local language even as we're speaking English. And that's just the way we communicate with each other. But obviously that doesn't fly when you're working in a remote setting. So just practice speaking purely English with as like the best grammar that you can probably use. And obviously you don't have to be using like huge words like discombobulated or flummoxed or anything of the sort. Like just use basic simple English, but practice speaking well. So the more you practice speaking well, the more that you're able to learn to write in a way that is friendly, communicative, but also still professional. And practicing speaking well also helps you to be ready for when you do decide to transition to taking video calls with people. This is something that I had to do because after a couple of years of working on Upwork, I kind of decided like, okay, I want to be able to get clients on my own and keep 100% of the profit. That's a whole other story, but we'll not get into that right now. Anyways, I decided that I wanted to start getting clients away from Upwork. So I started to interact with Facebook groups and everything. And I quickly learned that getting on calls with potential clients was just part and parcel of the game. So I also had to increase my, the way I communicated on screen. I had to learn video call etiquette. So I had to make sure that I showed up to calls on time. I had to make it a seamless experience for my clients to book calls with me using tools like Calendly, which is something I'll talk about later in the video. I had to do a bunch of things basically, to make sure that I showed up and communicated clearly. And this is a skill that, trust me, in the beginning, it feels really, really strange, especially like when getting on calls with clients. If I'm being completely honest, 7 years later, sometimes I will still get on a call and I will still be sweating through all my clothes, but the client will never know because I have learned the skill of how to talk to people on video calls, right? And it's taken me years. So in the beginning, it's not going to be perfect, but each time that you get on a call, each time that you send out a written proposal, pay attention to like what worked, what didn't, what can I improve later, and just commit to becoming a professional in the way that that you communicate online. Another thing about like when you're writing proposals for clients, you have to always be able to research the client so that when you do show up for a call or when you write a proposal, you can show that you know something about them. And this brings me to the other skill that I think you really need to learn, which is the ability to research information and just present it in a way that is clear. So when it comes to researching information, you need to be able to find reliable information very quickly. We live in the information age, meaning that there's an overabundance of information out in these streets. A lot of it is biased, a lot of it is false, especially in this day and age of LLMs creating content that they can hallucinate and just give you completely falsified information. Trust me, I know this has happened to me. You need to be able to find, one, reliable information. Two, you need to be able to evaluate the sources for credibility. When it comes to working online, you just can't work online without research, because most of the time you're going to find yourself in a very high growth environment, and that means you have to be learning and iterating and practicing things on a very regular basis. If you have a job like an executive assistant, for example, you're also helping your client to research things like, hey, can you research that client for me and come up with an outline for a proposal? Hey, can you research, I want to go talk about this and this topic at this upcoming event and I need a presentation designed. Obviously, you're not going to be an expert on some of the things that your client is an expert on, but you can research and come like your job basically is to get 80% of the way so that the client only has to worry about 20%. So being able to research information and present it in a very clear way is a highly, highly important skill. And speaking of presentation, that deserves its own talking point. So skill number 3, you need to be able to present and document information in a way that is useful. Your clients are busy building businesses. They don't have the time to like sit around researching and learning their own things, and they typically have to make information very quickly. If let's say you're an executive assistant, for example, and your client wants you to research some particular report or something, it does not help them for you to come with a 30-page document as the information you're providing them. That's just going to overwhelm them, and it's going to keep them from being able to make their decision quickly like they need. So when it comes to presentation, one, you need to be able to present in multiple different formats. So whether it's a Google Doc with like paragraphs and sections and complete with a table of contents, or whether it's designing an entire PowerPoint presentation, or if it's writing the shortest TLDR email. TLDR, by the way, stands for too long didn't read. If you're able to communicate key points in an email because that's what your client prefers, you need to learn all of these different ways to be able to present information. And this isn't just for executive assistants. Even, for example, in the past when I was doing like Facebook ad management for clients, I needed to present the data in a way that the client was able to see, this is what you were looking at like before, these are the results that we had, this is the impact, this is this, and this is what I recommend moving forward. So it doesn't matter what type of work you're doing remotely, you still need to be able to summarize a lot of information in a way that is concise, because at the end of the day, you're helping a client to really make their key decisions, which now actually brings me to my next skill, which is offering business development support. So like I mentioned before, clients are busy and they're always making very high level decisions, and they need to make these decisions quickly. So for you to present information in a way that is relevant is just one of the ways you're offering business development support. Some of the other ways, especially as an executive assistant, that you're offering business development support is preparing for sales meetings, following up with potential clients, managing the proposal process, things like that. If you're not working as an executive assistant, and let's say you're working as a social media manager, then you're helping them save time by actually creating the content. I had a client that I did this for once, where she was spending a lot of time on the marketing side, yet she really needed to be doing business development. So I went in and I was responsible for handling all of the content creation, and as part part of me wanting to show initiative, I actually created like an entire like content production management system in Notion that just it made it so that she only had to spend 1 maximum 3 hours a week just kind of reviewing everything that I'd done and giving her a stamp of approval. So there's different ways that you can offer business development support. It's not specific to those of us that work as executive assistants. What I want to encourage you is that if you have the mindset of what I'm doing is valuable to the client for them to build their business, then you're on the right track, because at the end of the day, like I mentioned in previous videos, clients are out here building businesses so they can make profits, so they can make a kind of impact in the world. Your job is to help them do that in any way, shape, or form. So as long as you have that mindset of I am supporting this person and their business and their dream, then you're going to find ways to be valuable for your clients. So in as much as all of us wear different roles when we're working remotely, there's certain core tools that everybody has to know how to use regardless of the core function, which brings me to skill number 5. You need to be tech proficient in certain core tools. If you're someone who hasn't yet had experience working remotely, some of the tools that you need to be able to learn are like Google Workspace, for example. So that's your Google Docs, your Google Sheets, your slides, Google Zoom, what's it called? Google Meet, things like that. You need to be able to use communication tools like Zoom and Google Meet. Again, you need to be able to use project management software like Asana or Monday.com or Notion. At the end of the day, every client is going to have their own what's called a tech stack, which is basically the tools that they use for their company to move forward. And you need to be able to learn at least the bare minimum of one of each category. So for example, if you're proficient in Google Workspace, you can easily transfer over into something like Microsoft. If you're familiar with something like Trello or Asana, then it's easy for you to translate that into something like Monday.com. So you don't have to learn all the tools, but you do need to learn the basic concepts and the ones that cut across every single company. Video communication tools, document storage and management, project management tools, things like that. You need to be able to use some of these core tools, okay? So again, just to encourage you, you can always learn on the job. In fact, you should always learn on the job. However, just because you don't have certain tools and knowledge in place doesn't mean you can't go ahead and apply for these jobs. And when now you're asked to do something, use that as your chance to be like, okay, I have a skill deficit here, let me go and fill it. So use what you already know to get your first or your next job and commit yourself to learning new tools. So like I mentioned, I'm improving my Google Sheets skills because like I want to get to like Pro Master. I can use like Google Sheets in my sleep and do like actual data analysis. So yeah, commit to learning, but also don't let you not knowing something stop you from getting started. So one of the categories I mentioned was project management, and this actually brings me to my next skill, which is project management fundamentals. One lie that we always tell ourselves is that we will remember everything that we're going to do. But let's face it, guys. One, the older that you get, the less reliable your memory is. You're not going to remember to do every single task. Like you might do that in your household, like because you have to remember to cook supper, right? So you might be able to do that. And to be honest, at that point, some of these things are on autopilot. But when it comes to work, you're going to forget things. Especially if you have kids, like when it comes to work-related things, you will constantly forget them because your kids will always take priority and more mental space for you than your work-related things. So learning the fundamentals of proper project management is essential. Whether you're a freelancer or a remote full-time employee, you just have to get good at project management. So for me, some of the tools that I've tried include like Asana and Trello and Monday.com and Notion. My personal favorite is Notion. Like, listen, guys, if I could live my entire life building and organizing Notion workspaces, I would be a happy camper. And in fact, in my current role, I've been able to develop 3 different dashboards for 3 different teams, and it's absolute bliss. Now, those of you who know Notion know that it can be overwhelming, so please don't start with Notion unless the company that you're working with is already using Notion. But things like try out something as simple as Trello. You can get started for free. Again, learn how to use these things. Even if you don't have a job yet, you can figure out a way to learn them for yourself on your own time to manage your own life right now. It can be as simple as I use Trello to plan my work, my housework schedule at home or my workout schedule or something like that. The point is just get started. Most of these tools you can get started for free, so there's really no barrier to entry. And there's also a ton of videos that you can watch on YouTube. And then if you really want to go geeky like some of us, you can even read some of these like productivity books from the likes of Gosh, I'm blanking right now. There's books like Getting Stuff Done. There's a book by Ali Abdal called I've forgotten the name. I will include it right here. But things like that. At the end of the day, when you're working remotely, being very good at project management helps you make sure that, one, you don't forget things. Two, like, you're actually able to track your progress, and when it's time for you to give a report, you can say, okay, this week I worked on this project and I went from task 1, 2, 3, and then I stalled here, and so I'm reaching out to you to say, like, hey, could you give me these assets so that I can continue, and etc., etc. And once you make that a way that you work on a daily basis, you become a lot more reliable, you become a lot more trustworthy, and that's something that clients are really looking for when they're looking for remote workers. They need someone who is reliable, someone they can trust, someone they know that, okay, I just have to give them an instruction at the beginning of the week, and at the end of the week, there's going to be actual tangible results. So your project management tools and capabilities, these are going to help you to deliver on the work, and they're also going to help you to track and ultimately help you to report what you've been doing. So in case any of you was out here thinking like remote work is just you getting a paycheck to sit around and do nothing, no, you actually have to show what you're doing, okay? And using project management tools is one of the ways that you can do that. And one final thing about these project management tools, they are absolutely essential to enable you to work asynchronously. This is something I mentioned in my previous videos, and it's something that just happens with remote work. Being able to work asynchronously means you're working across different time zones, and that really brings me to skill number 7, which is the ability to work remotely and globally in different time zones with different cultures. So when it comes to working with clients remotely, one of the things you'll find is you have to match your time in some way, shape, or form to the client's time zone. So when you're a freelancer, you kind of have a bit more flexibility in that you can determine when you're actually going to work on tasks, and you only now have to make sure that there's an overlap in time so that you can get on calls with your clients in the times that they prefer. When you're working as a full-time employee, you might have to completely switch around how your day works. So for example, for me right now, I work in the CET time zone, which means that my workday starts at around 10 a.m., right? But in CET time, that's actually 8 a.m. And so my entire day is shifted forward by a couple of days. So while your traditional 9-to-5ers are getting home at 5 p.m. and in my time, I'm still fully in my work day, and I'm going to be working until 7 p.m. But those are some of the things that you need to get used to. Some other skills that I've learned over the years that are really, really important for working remotely are the ability to communicate clearly, even if you're not going to get immediate responses, because again, remember, people have different time zones. So that brings us back to the very first point when I said you need to learn to communicate clearly. It also applies here, where you need to be able to, one, follow up on messages as soon as you see them within reason, and then you need to be able to learn to do things like, for example, scheduling emails. For example, like maybe you're working at 11 p.m. your time, but then the client, it's not an appropriate time for the client to be receiving an email. You need to learn to use tools, for example, like schedule send, and schedule the email to go out at a time that's appropriate for your client. Okay, things like that. You need to be able to learn to document everything for reference. This is where project management comes back in. You need to be able to set clear expectations about availability. These are some of the things, if you're working as a full-time employee, these are things that you can discuss with the HR manager. If you're working as a freelancer, you get to determine for yourself when you're available to work. And then finally, another thing that we need to talk about is keeping time. Guys, there is no room for African time in remote settings. You must actually be early, not on time, early for everything. That is the only way you can be taken seriously. So these things of coming to meetings at like 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, 30 minutes late, heck, even completely forgetting. I'm not gonna lie, I once completely forgot that I had a meeting. Like, it was so embarrassing, but that has happened to me like twice in 7 years. The point is, learn to be early in everything. And in order for you to manage your time effectively, you have to be really, really good at calendar management, which is the 8th skill that I have learned over time. So when you're working remotely, you live by your calendar. If it's not scheduled on your calendar, it's not real. So that means you have to work with your client and decide, okay, at what time are we meeting? Is it on the calendar? You have to determine for yourself, these are my time blocks when I'm working, especially if you work freelance, because again, I've mentioned a couple of times in this video that when you're freelance, you have a bit more autonomy over your time. But you need to be able to say like, okay, in this time, if you're a freelancer, for example, on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, from this time to this time, I work on projects for this client. And then on Wednesday and Friday at this other time, I work on projects for this other client. And every day I have a 90-minute block where I'm working on my own business to go and find clients, because remember, as a freelancer, you're responsible for finding the clients for yourself, okay? So some of the ways that I can recommend you get started with managing your calendar effectively are: 1, start by blocking off dedicated family and work time to improve your efficiency. Because guys, here's a reality. We work to fund our lifestyles, okay? And if you decide you're working from home, if you're a mom like me and you decide you're working from home, it's really because you want to be there for your kids. So it's important for you to block off time for them first and foremost, okay? Get in the habit of working in smaller chunks of time, because there's a principle that says that work will always expand to fill up the time that's allocated for it. So if you give yourself an entire 8 hours to design one graphic, it's going to take you 8 hours to design that one graphic. If, however, you tell yourself, I have exactly 90 minutes to work on this graphic from start to end, you will be able to do it. Trust me, I've done it before. There's a time I went into work and I was told like, hey, we need this graphic really, really fast. And like, this is me checking into work first in the morning. Guys, in 30 minutes flat, I had a brilliant brand new graphic that was perfect, and it was out to social in like no time flat, right? If I had been told the day before, it could have taken me even 3 hours to create the same graphic. So when you get in the habit of working in smaller chunks of time, it makes you a lot more efficient, a lot more effective, and this helps you to have a much bigger impact on the client's business much more quickly. Another thing I would recommend is you need to learn to have buffer periods, especially between meetings. The thing about meetings is they will typically run over the time that you've planned, so you always need to have time to account for that, okay? And obviously try and get in the habit of making sure your meetings end on time, but again, allow buffer, even if it's buffer just for you to rest, right? So for me, I had different kinds of buffer. I had days when, as a freelancer, I had days when I had 0 meetings. For me, Monday was a 0 meeting day because I just needed time to acclimatize to the week. And then I would take meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then had like 2 hours available on Wednesday. And Wednesday for me was a half day, because in the morning hours, it was time dedicated to spending with my kids for us to be able to go for Bible study and things like that. Another thing is you need to be able to set up automatic scheduling systems, because one of the biggest headaches with working remotely is figuring out time zones, especially when you have things like daylight savings. So for example, in Europe, daylight savings is going to start the Sunday after I record this. And so for you, like, trying to wrap your mind around these things can be a whole headache. But that's where scheduling tools like Calendly and Dubsado come in, because they just make it easy for you to manage everyone's schedule, because they automatically convert times into a client's time zone. So you set the times you're available, or they set their times that they're available, and then each of you is able to see what time it is in your own time zone and set a time that actually works best for you. And so tying this back specifically to when you're an executive assistant, learning how to use these skills translates directly, because you're able to effectively protect your executive's time. You're able to prioritize the right meetings. You're able to create space for them to do deep work and things like that. So at the end of the day, calendar skills are important not just for you, but also for your client, because by you managing calendars well, whether you are an executive assistant managing a client's calendar, or you're a freelancer and you're managing your own calendar well so that you're effective for your client, you're buying back their time. Time is the most precious resource that we all have, and clients in particular, that's something that they highly value. So you need to learn calendar management in order to be effective and efficient in your work. Every skill and every tool and every approach that I've talked about in this video is learned through trial and error. Like I said in the beginning, I had no idea how any of this stuff worked. I had to go step by step, from learning how to write written proposals, to learning how to network in Facebook groups, to learning how to get onto video calls using tools like Calendly and all those things. I remember I had a joke with some of my friends who work in office when the pandemic hit. They were like, Jojo, you're already used to these things of having meetings on Zoom and all that. Some of us are out here fumbling and we don't understand, and you're just kind of like a native. But the thing is, I didn't get there overnight. It's taken me 7+ years to learn some of these skills. So at the end of the day, I had to learn these things out of necessity, because remember, I made the decision to go remote because I wanted to be there for my children. And so I've been willing to make everything work at whatever cost. I'm willing to learn as many new skills as I can in order to be effective on the internet. And again, I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect at all. Right now, I'm learning the new skill of being consistent on YouTube. And like, it's hard. It's in the beginning, everything is hard. But the more you do it, the more you the more you commit yourself to continuously improving, the easier it gets. And again, the more skills you learn, the more you open yourself up to more responsibilities, and the more skills you learn. It's kind of like I don't know what the phrase is. I don't know. It kind of creates a flywheel. The more you learn, right? A quick tip for moms who are just getting started, and especially when you have little babies, figure out ways to learn in the margins of your time. So for example, my very first job was as a digital marketer. I did not have experience as a digital marketer. I went to school for journalism, and by the way, I've never actually been on the inside of a TV or radio studio. I don't even know what it looks like. Anyways, the way that I learned marketing with a small child was every night when I was making supper and clearing the dishes and all that stuff, I would have a marketing podcast on. And so I'll be learning things like Facebook ads and cost of acquisition and all these other metrics and things. And the more that I did that, the more it started to make sense to me. And it was kind of like a passive way of learning because that's all I could do at the time. But it was enough for me to land my first job. Granted, this was an in-office job, but it was enough for me to land my first job as a digital marketer at the time. And I've been building on that ever since. So just figure out ways that you can learn in the margins of your time. The other piece of advice I would give is that don't be afraid to work for free in the beginning, not for a long time, just in the beginning. So for example, it was 2 years ago, my biggest client that I ever landed, I found like a podcast of his that he had done, and I wanted to work for him as his marketing manager. So I took that podcast, took out a little snippet, created like what's it called? Like a short video for social media. And I think I also created a few graphics that he could have used on Instagram. And I sent him a message. He had no idea who I was. I was like, hey, I created these things for you for free. If you like them, feel free to use them. For me, what do I want? I just want to work with you. So if you're open to it, let's have a conversation. And we did. We got on a call, we vibed, and he hired me. And it was the highest paying client I had had up to that time. So please don't be afraid to work for free. Think of it as this is you proving your worth to the client ahead of time. In some cases, it might be like you going into a Facebook group and saying, hey, I'm a volunteer VA, and all I want in exchange is like a testimonial. In other times, like what I did, you actually create work and then go ahead and pitch it, use it to pitch and show clients what you can actually do. But just don't be afraid to work for free. And so, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's a lot more skills that one has to learn, and these are skills that I am currently learning. So in the next video, which I'll put up here when it's ready, I'm going to be talking about other advanced skills that are helping me right now as an executive assistant. So for now, please let me know in the comments what skill you want to work on, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!